The former White House Chief of Staff, Member of Congress, Secretary of Defense, and U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney has died, his family has said. He was 84. Cheney was one of the country's most powerful vice presidents, widely reported to wield great influence over the less experienced George W. Bush, the president under whom he served. Cheney was in office on the 11th of September 2001 during the terrorist attacks on New York and Washington. While Bush was hurried to safety, Cheney worked with the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, to assume policy control. Troops were soon in Afghanistan, fighting the Taliban and hunting al-Qaeda. But Cheney's place in history will be dominated by the decision to invade Iraq. He had been Defense Secretary during the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein in 1990 and 1991, but now Cheney and Bush's public rationale for war was that the Iraqi dictator was linked to al-Qaeda and thus 9/11 and possessed weapons of mass destruction. By March 2003, when U.S. and coalition forces invaded, no proof had been found for either charge, and both were soon proved false. Although Cheney sought international cooperation, he also thought, he later wrote, that the Bush administration had an obligation to do whatever it took to defend America. The death toll was high. According to the Watson School of International and Public Affairs at Brown University, since 2001, at least 800,000 people have been killed by direct war violence in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and Pakistan. The treatment of prisoners taken by the U.S. in its war on terror also proved hugely controversial. Out of office, Cheney continued to defend the use of torture against detainees after 9/11.
Police in Israel have arrested and detained the military's top legal officer after she admitted leaking footage of soldiers allegedly attacking a Palestinian detainee, and then, in effect, lying about her actions to Israel's High Court. The military advocate general, Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi, said in a resignation letter last week that she had authorized publication of the video to defuse attacks on military investigators and prosecutors working on the case. Right-wing politicians and pundits championed soldiers detained over the case as heroes, attacked military investigators as traitors, and called for the case against the soldiers to be dropped. Tomer Yerushalmi has now been arrested on suspicion of fraud and breach of trust, abuse of office, obstruction of justice, and disclosure of official information by a public servant, Israeli media reported. Her arrest and detention raises serious questions about the rule of law in Israel, accountability for abuse and killing of Palestinians during what a UN commission has called a genocidal war, and the country's ability to defend itself in international courts. In July 2024, prosecutors raided the Stedteiman Military Detention Center, which has become notorious for torture, and detained 11 soldiers for interrogation. They were suspects in a violent assault on a Palestinian from Gaza, including anal rape. The victim was hospitalized with injuries including broken ribs, a punctured lung, and rectal damage, according to the indictment, and Tomer Yerushalmi launched an investigation. The government and far-right politicians and pundits have accused her of damaging Israel's global standing by pursing the case and releasing the video, in effect, casting her efforts to prosecute extreme violence as a project to undermine the state.
Rachel Reeves has refused to rule out tax rises in this month's budget, insisting she must deal with the world as I find it, not the world as I might wish it to be. The Chancellor foreshadowed an income tax increase, a breach of Labour's manifesto commitment, as a result of the public finances being in a worse state than expected after years of economic mismanagement. In an early morning Downing Street press conference, she said that each of us must do our bit for the country's future. If we have to build the future of Britain together, we will all have to contribute to that effort, she said. As Chancellor, I have to face the world as it is, not the world that I want it to be. And when challenges come our way, The only question is how to respond to them, not whether to respond or not, she told reporters. In a speech intended to frame the tough budget choices about taxing the budget, Reeves said the economic challenges facing the UK, including global tariffs, sticky inflation, volatile supply chains and defence spending, had got worse since last year's financial statement. I put our public finances back on a firm footing, provided an urgent cash injection into faltering public services, and began rebuilding our economy. But since that budget, the world has thrown even more challenges our way, she said. Reeves said she would not duck the difficult choices ahead, even if they broke her pledge not to put up income tax, VAT, or national insurance. I could do what previous governments have done, which is to sweep those challenges under the carpet, to cut capital spending, to make the numbers up.
I will make the choices necessary to deliver strong foundations for our economy. My budget, led by this government's values of fairness and opportunity, and focused entirely on the priorities of the British people, protecting our NHS, reducing our national debt, and improving the cost of living. There is a lot of speculation about the choices that I will make. I understand that. These are important choices that will shape the future of our country for years to come. As I take my decisions on both tax and spend, I will do what is necessary to protect families from high inflation and interest rates, to protect our public services from a return to austerity.
3, 2, 1.
It's been 33 years since the United States last tested a nuclear weapon. U.S. President Donald Trump may end that streak after a surprise announcement made only minutes before meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Trump said he's instructing the Pentagon to test the U.S. nuclear arsenal on a, quote, equal basis with other nuclear powers like China and Russia. But why did the U.S. ever stop nuclear testing? They were the ones who opened the nuclear era by detonating a 20-kiloton atomic bomb in New Mexico in July 1945. A month later, they struck Hiroshima and Nagasaki with atomic bombs to force Japan to surrender in World War II. Thus began 5 decades of nuclear tests around the globe. The United Nations says some 2,000 tests were carried out, with the U.S. accounting for 1,032 of them.
By negotiating a treaty to freeze the production of fissile materials for use in nuclear weapons.
That mostly wound down after 1996 with the Comprehensive Nuclear Ban Treaty. It forbids nuclear explosions by everyone, everywhere. Heather Williams is a nuclear weapons expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
The last U.S. nuclear test was in 1992. This was largely driven by public outcry, the environmental impacts, the humanitarian consequences associated with nuclear testing, but also there was a growing international movement to do away with nuclear testing.
Russia ratified the treaty in the year 2000. Then in 2023, President Vladimir Putin rolled that ratification back. The U.S. signed it, but never ratified it. So what would testing do for the U.S., and why now? Testing new weapons would offer what any test can, evidence of what they can do, and testing older weapons would check if they can still work. And for the Trump administration, this may have been under consideration for some time. In 2020, The Washington Post reported that the first Trump administration had talked about whether or not to conduct a test. As to the timing, any U.S. test would be seen by Russia and China as a deliberate flex of U.S. power. Putin has said that if the U.S. resumed testing, Russia would too. While post-Soviet Russia has never held a test, days before Trump's announcement, they tested a nuclear-powered cruise missile, nuclear-powered autonomous torpedo, and held a nuclear readiness drill, all in the span of a week. Putin has also said a global nuclear arms race is already underway, and Trump has justified his decision by claiming other countries are already testing.
Other countries do it. If they're going to do it, we're going to do it.
However, Williams says a U.S. testing restart may help Beijing the most.
The United States conducted over 1,000 nuclear tests. Russia conducted over 700. China has done less than 100 nuclear tests. And a lot of Chinese experts and officials have pointed out that China might be at a disadvantage in terms of knowledge of its arsenal and weapons design because it just doesn't have as much testing data. And so if the taboo against nuclear testing was broken, if there was a return to more nuclear tests, China stands to gain way more from this than the United States would.
The world once hosted some 70,000 nuclear weapons at the height of Cold War stockpiling in 1986. Now that number is closer to 12,000, most of which are held by Russia and the U.S. China is number 3, with a stockpile that has doubled to 600 in the past 5 years under Xi Jinping. All 3 are undergoing major modernizations of their arsenals.
Nigeria said on Sunday it would welcome U.S. help fighting Islamist insurgents, but only if its territorial integrity is respected. The comments came after Trump said he'd asked the Pentagon to prepare for fast military action if the country didn't crack down on religious violence. Then on Sunday, he confirmed to reporters that he was considering intervention.
They're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria. And they have other countries very bad also. You know that part of the world, very bad. They're killing the Christians and killing them in very large numbers.
Nigeria denies all claims of Christian persecution. Speaking in Washington, Presidential Advisor Daniel Bwala said outdated reports were being misused. But he said the situation was an opportunity to engage the U.S. in finding common ground.
The report or notion that there is a Christian persecution or genocide in Nigeria is false. We're willing, anytime, any day. I personally have a feeling that in the next couple of days, they are going to have a sit-down together. And then we will find a common front in this fight against insecurity.
Nigeria has faced deadly attacks from Islamist insurgents like Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa for over 15 years, with most violence concentrated in the Muslim-majority Northeast. The country is split between a largely Muslim North and a mostly Christian South. While Christians have been targeted, analysts say most victims of extremist violence have been Muslims. Crisis monitoring group ACLED says that out of nearly 2,000 attacks on civilians in Nigeria this year, the number targeting Christians because of their religion stood at 50. Claims by some U.S. right-wing groups that as many as 100,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria since 2009 are not supported by available data. John Joseph Hayab is the Northern Nigeria chairman of the country's Christian Association. He supports U.S. intervention over religious violence, but said he opposed any foreign influence on the country's leadership.
What some of us will not support is anybody deciding who should be our leader. It's purely a Nigerian thing. But if they are reminding us that what is accepted in our constitution, what is acceptable in other standards, we should do it.
Trump's threat of military action came a day after his administration added Nigeria back to a list of nations that the U.S. says have violated religious freedoms. Experts warn that U.S. strikes in Nigeria would be difficult to execute as militant groups operate across vast, porous borders.
The Trump administration says it plans to only partly pay out the food assistance people would normally get in November from SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. But it warned that some states may take weeks or even months to calculate and disperse the aid. SNAP benefits, also known as food stamps, lapsed for the first time ever on November 1st during the federal shutdown. It serves about 1 in 8 Americans, some 42 million people, and partial payments are unprecedented in the program's 60-year history. Monday's announcement came after a federal judge's order Friday that the administration must use emergency funds to at least partially cover November's SNAP benefits. A coalition of Democratic-led states had sued the Trump administration to draw on contingency funding for it. Meanwhile, the government shutdown is close to breaking the record for the longest in U.S. history. On Monday, Democratic and Republican leaders continued to blame one another.
We're on day 34 of the Democrat shutdown.
This is day 34 of the Trump Republican shutdown.
About 750,000 federal workers have been furloughed since government funding ended. The Trump administration has taken steps to pay troops, federal law enforcement, and immigration officers. Other federal employees are working without pay.
On the streets of New York, Shashank RK is doing something he's never done before. He's going door to door to rally support for a politician. Shashank leads a group of canvassers for Zoran Mamdani, the Democratic candidate for city mayor. The campaigner says he was inspired by the young candidate, with both having immigrant backgrounds.
I saw that this young man, Zoran Mamdani, who I think wasn't even, maybe had just turned 30, wasn't even 30 years old, was going on a hunger strike for the taxi workers, and I thought, this is the kind of politics that I've been trying to see represented by people who look like me.
When Mamdani announced his candidacy, Shashank said it was only a matter of time before he got involved. He is now a field leader for Zoran for NYC, a grassroots campaign where volunteers go from house to house or make phone calls to reach potential voters for Mamdani.
We are here in Jackson Heights, which is, in my opinion, an immigrant haven. Here, even in New York City, it's a particularly diverse neighborhood, and you can't walk down a block without passing people who speak 3 or 4 different languages. And that really is the essence of what makes the city great, is working class immigrants who came here with just a dream, my parents being among them, and have built things with no name recognition.
We spoke with one voice. New York is not for sale.
Mamdani's campaign has centered on making New York City more affordable for its working class and hiking taxes on New York's wealthiest.
Together, New York, we're going to freeze the... Together, New York, we're going to make buses fast and... Together, New York, we're going to deliver universal... We will make our city one where every person who calls it home can live a dignified life.
Polling makes Mamdani the frontrunner in the mayoral race, though his policies have attracted staunch opposition from some of the city's wealthiest residents. Donald Trump is an opponent too, calling Mamdani a communist. The U.S. president has crossed party lines to endorse Andrew Cuomo, a longtime Democrat now running as an independent. Republican Bet Curtis Sliwa trails far behind in the polls. For Shashank, Trump's opposition only adds to the case for a Mamdani win in New York.
And now suddenly we have a federal government that wants to turn around on them and then turn them into the enemy when, in my opinion, it's the entire working class, including the immigrant communities of New York, especially the immigrant communities of New York, that have made the city great.
These divers are retrieving mussels in Greece's Ionian and Aegean seas to gauge the health of the country's waters. Scientists say what surfaced is an uncomfortable truth, an increase of microplastic pollution in an area already facing pressure from mass tourism.
Once you collect the sample and you see all the tiny microplastics, it's like, it blows your head.
For decades, researchers have used mussels as a barometer of marine pollution. The filter-feeding organism gives them a glimpse into what's going on beneath the waves as it absorbs different contaminants into their tissue, including invisible microplastics. This year, researchers at the Hellenic Center for Marine Research deployed thousands of mussels at various depths and sites, from busy Greek port areas to remote islets. Biologist Nicoletta Dica explains what was revealed when divers pulled the mussels out in September.
On average, we find 1 or 2 microplastic per population that we analyze. For example, if we catch 40 fish, 1.5 of these fish will be found with a microplastic in their stomach.
The particles range in shape and are mostly blue or transparent, indicating that they originate from single-use plastics. Dica says over time, this plastic will increase as waves, currents, and sun exposure break them into smaller pieces, making them harder to detect.
This means that there will be more microplastics available for marine organisms to consume. So this means that we may, in the next years, we will find even more microplastics in the guts of the organisms.
Since mussels are edible, the samples help scientists assess the potential impact of their consumption on human health. Dica says while concentrations are not yet high enough to be harmful, she warns that without immediate action to stop the use and poor disposal of plastic, continued fragmentation could increase risks.
David Beckham, one of Britain's most celebrated footballers, was knighted by King Charles at Windsor Castle earlier today, recognizing his decades-long contribution to sport and charitable causes. The 50-year-old former Manchester United star received the honor at the royal residence more than 20 years after he was awarded a separate royal honor recognizing his contribution to football. Beckham, a lifelong admirer of the royal family, was dressed in a suit designed by his wife, Victoria Beckham, a fashion designer and former member of the Spice Girls pop band.